we are. We are back and we are live in the recorded sense. And I am Sam, your pop archivist. And today I have with me a special guest, the most quantum leapiest of archivists. That's the worst. That's not a very good, clever way of saying this, but Rory Grennan is here and we're going to talk about some shit. Hi, Laura. Hi, Rory.
Hey, everybody.
Hey. So Rory and I have known each other for some time. Mutual friend between us, Kara Bertram, who is a previous guest on the show. And then we just became friends through osmosis.
Hey, Kara on. I need to watch that one too.
Yeah, Kara and I talked about The Simpsons. Um,
Nice. Hall of
yeah,
Records. Did you talk about the Hall of Records?
we talked about the Hall of Records,
Nice.
the boring one, not the cool one. And we talked about the episode, at least the Iconoclast, where it's like the historical revision of Jebediah
Yes.
Springfield. Yeah, those were the two
Sprungfell.
that stood out to us the most. I think we're also tempted to talk about like Batman, like the kind of DC universe of archives and archivists as well. So it's on the table. We're thinking about it, but yeah, there's especially with a lot of my friends, there's always a lot of topics, and we always tend to, tangentially talk about things. But
Everything's about archives somehow.
I know
Yeah.
it really is. Like when the majority of your friends are archivists, it turns out you're all kind of like, hey, did you know there's an archivist in this? But so we've gotten to know each other over the years, and you and I actually share a love of kind of like Marvel properties and kind of their connection to archives. Because I think when we were initially banding about like what we would talk about, you're currently writing something about is it Marvel in general? Is it like just the X-Men or something in archives, right?
Yeah. No, I have an article in my back pocket about the Avengers
Mm,
case files that's going to
there we
come
go.
out someday. But yeah, and we were talking right before we recorded about comic
Mm-hmm.
books and archives, but that's one. The Avengers use their own records in a way that's sort of like a military thriller or a spy thriller where like
Mm-hmm.
files are important and they help drive the plot and like do
Yeah,
the
yeah.
exposition work and stuff. And Avengers case files are very much the same way. So that's a whole other podcast. We
Oh
could do
yeah,
it
yeah.
another time.
Uh,
Yeah.
but yeah, it was one of those things we were kind of talking about, like, do we want to go on that? Do we, when we were trying to figure out like how we wanted to approach this episode. And then I think I don't know how it got to Quantum Leap and Loki, but I think it was just the time travel element just seemed interesting. And then also the historical aspect of the time travel.
Yeah, no,
Um,
time travel is natural. It's a lot of natural parallels, I think, with archives work. Yeah,
yeah,
for
it's
sure.
really because I mean, if we start with because Loki especially, it's the freshest one in terms of the most recent show. Even though at the time of this recording, a new Quantum Leap will be premiering. It's September 10th. It'll be releasing on the 19th, I believe.
That sounds right.
Um,
Yeah, just like a
yeah,
week and a half. Yeah.
yeah. So by the time this episode drops, it'll already have aired. But at the same time, it's like they're bringing it back because Quantum Leap is an interesting premise. But Loki is very much a it's insular in the sense that it is just trying to talk about this one character, but also like the bigger implications of the impact that that character can have, not only in the approved timeline, but in various timelines. And like how actions shape the course of a timeline. And then you have like your Quantum Leap, where it's very much, it's not really talking about like branching timelines, but it's like one continuous timeline and how a person is affecting that through actions, and it's not even about the approval of a timeline. It's like, this is the set course of history. This is the destiny of the world. And this man, Sam Beckett, has to correct it.
Right. No, I feel like ideas about like true destiny are kind of behind both
Mm,
shows, right?
yeah.
We're just like, because in Loki, they're about pruning the timeline, right?
Yeah.
and they're like, well, this is the true history, and these other things are just variants. They say variants in the show,
Yeah.
which implies that like something else is the true thing, and the variants are just like these weird other things that need to be
Yeah. These
gotten rid of.
deviations.
And then in a quantum leap, there's a similar idea, right? With just the one timeline. I guess should we explain it for people who don't know what quantum
Yeah.
leap? I
Briefly
feel like
describe
everyone
quantum
does, but
leap.
they probably don't. Dr. Sam Beckett is a scientist who builds a time machine, and then it kind of gets out of control, and then he ends up bouncing around in time, for the most part, not under his own control. And what he finds out is when he does good, then he like bounces to the next timeline, and that's the next episode, right?
Yeah.
And so there's this idea that like it's right there in the, I have the speech right here somewhere, but
Yeah.
right at the top of the show, back when we used to have theme songs that explained what the show was about.
Right.
It was a very 90s thing.
Oh my God.
The narrator tells you right at the top of Quantum Leap that writing things that once went wrong. Like there's this idea of like this true destiny of all these people in the timeline, and there's a mistake and someone has to go back and fix it. And so I feel like those shows have that in common, where there's this idea that like some things were not meant to happen, and then the hero has to
it's actually like in a lot of ways Quantum Leap shares more in common with Doctor Who in a weird way, because Doctor Who has Doctor Who is all like space and time wibbly wobbliness, but there's always like episodes where the Doctor will show up and be like, this isn't the way this is supposed to happen, and so he will be like correcting a moment in time or in history, usually human history, because we're the most important beings in the just humans. It always seems to come back to like, oh, humans screwed this up, or humans were supposed to do this and something's changed it because this is not how it's supposed to happen. But so it's very much, you could almost lump Doctor Who into this same discussion, but we're trying to keep it to at least two properties today.
If we do.
Loki could have very easily been the Doctor. I mean, Tom Hiddleston, why not?
So it's very British.
It's very British.
Yeah,
because Loki's interesting because it's a very short season. I mean, it's only like what, 8-10 episodes, something like that.
Maybe fewer.
It's
like 6-hour thing or something.
Exactly. And it's good because I mean, Quantum Leap went on for what it was like 5 seasons.
It was a different thing. It was five seasons of episodic television.
Exactly. It's more like
very much a looser overall narrative, right?
Yeah, whereas Loki's trying to tell a kind of more tight, complete story that's very much focused on Loki, and getting him up to speed with the Loki we all know and love after, years of character development in several movies. But it is interesting how they use his prime, like Loki Prime's trajectory to catch him up. Like they're using the records and actions of that Loki to basically go like, no, we need you here now. Here's how we've measured your progress. You need to feel all of these things now because that's what this guy felt, and you have to get there in one episode.
Right.
And then, I mean, the big elephant in the room with Loki is that the Time Variance Authority, or the TVA, the majority of the scenes there are taking place in what is a massive archive. It's actually like they filmed it in Atlanta. I think we actually went to that hotel for one of the Society of American Archivists events. I remember distinctly being in that building at one point, but maybe it was just like we were traveling around in Atlanta and we went through that mall to avoid the mall or the hotel to avoid the heat at one point.
Oh, the underground?
Yeah.
Atlanta Underground. I just rewatched, I did some skimming of Loki right before this, and I could have sworn that part of that was actually the Luxor in Las Vegas. I don't know if you've ever seen the interior of that, but it's like you're inside the pyramid, and so like the walls just like keep going up forever.
Yeah, it's because I know that they filmed it in Atlanta, but it's also the layout is based off of a research library in Toronto. So it's like we're gonna use this hotel because it has that like really weird like retro futuristic, the elevator kind of thing going on there, or the escalator. And then the rest of it is filled with CGI background of basically it basically looks like a library. It does not look like an archives in the sense that you or I would recognize
Right,
it.
right,
It's very much like, oh, we're in a library, but it's also an archive.
right.
I know what in terms of your impressions of Loki, even with the limited amount of time, like what do you think of the TVA and its ultimate goals of sacred timeliness?
It's as much as I really enjoyed Loki and Quantum Leap, they, we said they both have that idea of like true destiny in
Mm-hmm.
mind, and like what the real, there's stuff that doesn't belong in history, and that's a thing that should like rub an archivist the wrong way a little bit,
Yeah,
right? That idea,
exactly.
it's ethically kind of weird. Like it makes for good narrative drama, but like
Mm-hmm.
um it gets a little too close to ideas that I think the archival field is trying to undo right now, that like
Sure.
some things are the real history and some things aren't. um so while I enjoy it as a fictional narrative, um putting it into practice, finding close analogs in our work kind of makes me a little uncomfortable, actually. It's like, oh, when people try to do that in real life, it's
Yeah.
not riveting.
The inherent imperialist colonial practices of archives always rears its ugly head at some point, because when you start talking about like what is the truth of history
Right.
versus a truth of history. And I think even in the article I talk about that, because I mean, you get very much in this postmodernist like idea of narratives and control of narratives and social justice and power and everything that my mentor Rand Jimerson talked about. And that I think going forward in the kind of in the archival literature has been much more prevalent in the last like 20 some years, of being like, hey, guess what, we need to decolonialize the archives because this is not good and we're complicit.
Yeah, yeah. um and another way to look at that, like that sort of like giant institution where like you walk into a building and it's huge and there's people walking everywhere, like that's like, it's always like visual shorthand for like an organization with a lot of resources,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then that's sort of the excuse for the library or the archives or whatever to
Mm-hmm.
have every single fact that could possibly be relevant to the heroes of the story, so they can just have it and just like move on with
Yep.
the plot. um and you and I and professional archivists the world over know that like that's not how archival research works. Like you can easily, there are dead ends everywhere all the time, but
Mm-hmm.
that never happens
Oh
on
yeah.
TV. And even I've been watching a lot of Quantum Leap recently, obviously, and I would say actually their handling of like what you can know from historical records is pretty fair. Like
Mm-hmm.
usually they'll name check. um One of the other conceits of the show is that Sam, the time traveler, has a friend who's like permanently in the late 90s and can come visit him in the past and provide information. His friend Al.
Yeah, Al.
So Al always shows up and he has this little handheld widget that's connected to the supercomputer in the late 90s, and instantly calls up all these historical facts that will help Sam solve whatever problem he's trying to solve in the past. And they usually do a good job actually of explaining how the supercomputer has these facts. They're like, oh, and in the paper 2 days from now, this person's going to die. And like, that's a clue to whatever the
Mm-hmm.
mission Sam has to do. Right. Once in a while, there's an episode where they're like, he's holding the widget and he's like, the bad guy's coming up the stairs in 2 seconds. And I'm like, my newspaper account has that.
How
Like,
do you know
the
this?
professional,
Like,
the certified archivist is like, what's your source on that, Al?
you've got real
But
time
yeah, are they watching this episode of Quantum Leap in the
were they
future?
filming it on a CCTV thing and he
Uh,
has access to the to the video
but for the
feed?
most part, Quantum Leap's handling of it feels plausible to me as a
Mm-hmm.
professional archivist. The facts that the supercomputer can have. Um, I think in Loki, it's almost parody, like the number of forms and things that he's able to pull out and learn about.
Mm-hmm.
like somebody watched Asgard fall down and then filled out a form after that. Like it's
Yeah.
actually kind of funny.
Which no, it's one of my favorite tropes, is divine or cosmic bureaucracy. It's
Yeah.
that idea that this is so futuristic because the TVA exists in this kind of like anachronistic yet futuristic bubble, because everything looks like it's from the kind of like late 50s early 60s kind of stuff, and
Yeah.
but the tech is futuristic and really slick. And you even have like your little hologram with Miss Minutes, who acts as your like artificial
Just
intelligence.
like
Like,
Al. Wait a
yeah,
minute.
she's like
Wait a
Al and
minute.
Ziggy combined,
Mhm.
but just seems more nefarious when you really think about it. Um, but yeah, like I love that trope because it's just like taking something that's so out there and fantastic, and then making it very mundane, where it's like, oh yeah, this tragic event happened in Asgard. Well, you got to fill out this form to make sure that it's filed here, and then it has to be initialed here, 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 and
Yeah,
here.
fill out multiversal destruction form E in triplicate
Yeah,
and send it to these
exactly.
three offices. And then they're
It's
always
the
stamped.
Yeah, exactly.
The
It's
other
things
universal
like,
sign of bureaucracy in the movies is a bunch of red stamps
oh,
everywhere.
for sure. Yeah, it's like I this isn't a it's not a great example, but like Jupiter Ascending. I don't know if you ever saw that.
Didn't see that one though.
Yeah, I mean, it's a ridiculous Wachowski sisters movie with like Mila Kunis and everything, but she finds out that she is a genetic replica basically of this lady who owns the earth, so she technically owns the earth and has to like fill out the forms for her genetic identity to be recognized as this person. Like it's just a whole thing. And but it's like the most entertaining part of that movie where you're just like the levels of bureaucracy just for her to get like this weird tattoo that says she owns the earth.
Right.
So I love that. Like that's entirely my jam. When I saw that that was a thing with Loki, I was like, oh, okay, you basically just made a show for me, Sam. Like,
Right.
so I appreciate that. But then yeah, like you were saying, like the TVA, because of their conceit of having record of like basically all timelines,
Right. Everything that
um
ever happened. Right.
yeah, anything that ever could and will happen, but then we pruned it so it technically didn't happen, until, spoilers for Loki, they let the timelines branch, because Kang the Conqueror's variant, played by Jonathan Majors, who's just delightful.
Had a
um
good time with that one.
oh
Yeah.
my god, like he's only in one episode and you're just kind of like, I love you and wish you had been here the whole time.
He'll be back, I have a feeling.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Playing a much less quirkier version of himself, but yeah, it's like, because you could almost look at this variant of Kang as an archivist in and of himself. Like he is looking through the records, the timelines, and going like, no, this is what we're keeping. This is what is true. This is, it's the idea of the constructed narrative or the constructed timeline, that
Right.
Kang is kind of putting together as he sees fit.
Which is like an awful way to do. If we can go back to like time travel as archival research, like
Yeah.
it's an awful way to do archival research is to have your conclusions already and then just go shopping only for the things that support. It's a terrible way to do any research, right? But
Sure. Yeah.
um, it's the opposite way to do effective primary source research is to start with a certain set of facts and then just stick to them.
Yeah. It's like,
It's
I know
not
how
how it
it's
works.
supposed to end here, so I will make sure everything leads to this point instead of the actual discovery process of compiling the research, going through it, and then forming the hypothesis and the, scientific method or whatever.
Right.
Yeah. Whereas like, because Quantum Leap is operating on this idea that the timeline is what it is. Like there's no real branching of anything.
Right.
It's I think
Right.
it's only in the last episode that they do anything that has any like long-term consequences for like Al and his wife, I believe. If you, I don't
Yeah.
know. Yeah.
Yeah, they did wrap some things up in the series finale, and that's the only one where you get into like doppelgangers and like something outside the timeline. That's where they start to touch on those
Mm-hmm.
ideas a little bit. But you're right. For the most part, the show, the premise, it's not. It was a different time for episodic television. Like the premise is the same every time
Yeah.
in 80s and 90s TV. Um, oh, sorry, that reminds me of something I was going to say. So
Yeah.
episodes and time travel as primary source research, like in watching Quantum Leap, like I feel like that's exactly what Sam Beckett is doing in every
Mm-hmm.
episode. He's doing good primary source research. Like he's in this situation,
Right.
but it's because it's a drama, like he has to figure out very quickly, think on his feet, like where he is and what's happening and who these people are.
Mm-hmm.
But he brings all these things to it that are like very good. He's a natural at
Yeah.
primary source research, right? He's curious, he's intelligent, he reads and speaks multiple languages. Is like all these things
Of
that you
course, he's
wish you
got
could
like,
do when you go to the
oh my
archives.
God, yeah. He's also got like a bunch of doctorates. I mean, he's a scientist.
Mhm.
I mean, is there anything Sam Beckett can't do? I don't know.
Not many, and
Yeah.
which is also convenient for episodic television because you can just have whatever skill that they need that week. But yeah, there's like a parallel there. Just the idea, the whole premise of the show is that you just decided to jump into the time machine and see what happened. And like
Yeah.
that's very much like an archival fishing expedition. Like how many times in your life has someone shown up in the reading room and been like, well, I heard you have, you know,
So and so.
what do you have on, you have the scientist papers. What can I find out? It's very much like a fishing expedition
Mm-hmm.
sometimes, right? Like you
Yeah.
don't, just the nature of archives and their description, like you don't know exactly what's in a collection every time, but you
Yeah.
do know the broad topics. So you're like jumping in. And then as you get into the collection, you start to surface the details. And that's Sam after his oh boy moment. Then he has to like figure out what the heck is actually going on. He's like checking calendar dates and he's doing all these things.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's him actually getting into the collection or the records or whatever.
No, it's that's a very fair assessment. Yeah, because I think there's also a lot of people out there whose misconception of archives is that people who work there know everything about everything that they have. That somehow an archivist is just innately aware of all topics, of all, like documentation, regardless of subject matter or whatever. Whereas in reality, depending on the time you have to put together collections and make them accessible and all that, like you might have a broad idea, but you don't really know much more beyond what maybe the researcher or the historian is looking for until you start either helping with that process and kind of getting into the nitty gritties of the research as well. Um,
Right.
yeah.
Right. All access, all description is just a compromise
Yeah.
between your universe of needs and your resources. And I was just explaining this to a student the other day that I by the time researchers come to the archives, they have like really unique, deep questions. Like
Mm-hmm.
people don't come to the reading room for things they could learn from Wikipedia or something, right?
For
Like they need
sure.
to know very exact things about very particular things. And all that is to say is that we're engaging with experts all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And I often learn things from research. I often end up adding things to the finding aid after people leave because I learned from them. Like
Yeah.
they're drawing connections, they're finding out what's significant about the stuff that they're looking
Yeah.
at.
Yeah, because they're coming to you like they have a specific, I mean, like you said, they have specific, very deep questions because they've probably been researching the topic for whatever amount of time and have gotten to the point where like, okay, hopefully I know what I'm looking for, like broadly speaking.
Right.
And I've done the research and it turns out that your facility has something that might be helpful to me. So like an archivist will have maybe a sense of the like I said, a general sense of all the kind of topical stuff because you have to put together like a quick finding aid, you have to have some historical like
Mhm.
details in there so that when people are looking up your finding aids hopefully online they're like, oh okay, they have this and this many boxes or whatever. It's never perfect obviously because you try but you never have everything that they want.
Right. And
um
that,
but
oh,
then like,
go ahead.
oh yeah, I mean it's just that in the process of helping with someone else's research you then learn from them as well as learn for yourself as you're helping out. So
And you see that moment in Quantum Leap, if I can keep going with this, if
yeah,
I can extend this metaphor
keep going.
of time travel as archival research,
Mm-hmm.
where so the counterpart of like whatever your reading room desk attendant is Al, the hologram, right? Because he's the one who's bringing the information from the future. Like
Mm-hmm.
there's a whole Project Quantum Leap team in the 90s, and there's a supercomputer, which I want to put a pin in and come back. It's always a supercomputer doing
Yeah,
the
always.
research in the movies, right? We can't, for some reason, people think it's not dramatic to just show your characters going through page
The
after
human
page of
element is
records. They always just feed it to a computer so the plot can just move on. But anyway, there's a supercomputer
mm-hmm.
in the future from Sam, and it's compiling. It's actually established in the show that it's just reading all the records in the National Archives, which I thought was a nice nod.
Oh, nice.
So it actually literally is archival research going on in Quantum Leap. And so Al, the supercomputer condenses whatever's important, and then Al brings it to Sam, and like
Mm-hmm.
that's the role of a research archivist, right? They're helping you narrow the question. They're helping you narrow down the number of the information sources that you need. But then there's always that back and forth where like Al and Sam are comparing notes because Sam's
Yeah.
on the ground in the past, and he's able to explain some of the things that behind the newspaper articles or whatever um, that Al and Ziggy have discovered. And so you see that moment in the show too, the
Mm-hmm.
negotiation between researcher
In first person
sort of research
perspective.
staff, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean it's interesting then when you think about that, because the computer is distilling information from the National Archives, giving it to Al who then relates that information back to Sam who has the on the ground first person primary resource basically perspective. And then because that's always the thing with historical research and this idea of like a truth versus the truth, it's like the newspaper articles, these things are an interpretation of events from the
right,
perspective of a person who wrote them. And then so you have Sam embodying a person who is essentially living that
right.
and then providing like more details or like trying to figure out like, okay, what's the weird thing we have to fix here, like what's supposed to happen versus what is happening, like those kinds of things. So it's oh god, I really need to go back and watch more Quantum Leap at this point.
It's very cheap on Blu-ray right now. Just so
Ooh, nice.
um, I'm not sponsored. I'm not
No
sponsored by
one's
Mill Creek
sponsored.
Entertainment, but I will
There
tell
is no sponsorship here.
I will tell you that the original Quantum Leap is very cheap on Blu-ray right now.
There.
Presumably coming streaming somewhere with this other one.
I would think. I
With this other
mean,
one coming out.
it's a fair like it's I know that because in initial research, like it wasn't necessarily like a huge ratings darling back in the 80s and 90s, but I feel like a lot of people really love. I mean, obviously they're remaking it, or no, are they remaking it, or is it like an extension? Like, is this new character going to be like similarly in the same universe as Sam Beckett, or is it just like a whole we're
I
just
don't
doing
know
it?
exactly. Some of the
Yeah.
press I've seen implies that it's a direct sequel to
Oh,
the
okay.
original show, but I don't know. I guess we'll all
Yeah,
find out.
that would be interesting.
I'm
Um,
there.
yeah, I mean, I'll watch.
NBC not a sponsor, but I am
No,
there.
not a sponsor. Donald P.
I,
Belisario, not a sponsor. Who, for those who don't know, Donald Belisario created Quantum Leap. He also created JAG,
Any of the TV shows.
NCIS. What was it? Tequila and Bonetti, which is a show about a talking dog and a detective.
I missed that one.
Oh yeah, it's one of those weird things that you pick up when you're watching YouTube videos. um but yeah, I don't know how much he has to do with this remake, but that's that kind of like universe of TV shows. So if you've enjoyed NCIS over the last 20 years, you have Quantum Leap to kind of thank for that.
That's right. That's right. There's always
Yeah,
somebody from the Navy, isn't there? I think Belisario was in the Navy.
I think he was. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
JAG, NCIS,
Yeah.
Al Calavici,
Yep.
Navy veteran. Yeah, there's
Also, just
always the
the
Navy.
late Dean Stockwell as Al. Oh, just I loved him so much.
So good
And
in that.
he was, and he
I
always
was
like showed up in a lot of stuff. Like he showed up in Stargate quite a lot too. Who I always enjoyed him.
I was just reading some behind the scenes stuff, and it's totally not about archives now, but
Doesn't matter.
Dean Stockwell, he was up for the role in Quantum Leap. He had just won an Oscar for a movie,
Mm-hmm.
Married to the Mob, and his friends were like, "What are you crazy? You're gonna go do TV or a movie star now?" And, well, thank God he decided to slum in TV
Yeah,
for a little while.
it was so good. Well, him and Bakula. I mean, I think Scott Bakula sometimes is very underrated as an actor. Like
Not
he's
by me.
I know, yeah, I think overall, like I know that he's very popular. Like you see Scott Bakula, like it's Scott Bakula. Look, it's
Yeah,
you're just happy to see him.
I
I
am. It's probably because of Quantum Leap too.
Yeah,
Quantum Leap
but
hit me
he
at a very impressionable age. I think I was
exactly right.
12 years old when it debuted on NBC, and so
And then there's also like, I mean, he was in Enterprise. I think some people have a soft spot for that
right.
show, depending on which season you're talking about. And then also he's CIS, I think now. CIS,
Yeah, he's on one of those. Yeah.
yeah, New Orleans. That he has to do some like shaky little New Orleans accent. I just remember catching a couple of episodes and being like, is he supposed to be native to New Orleans?
Is he
Because
supposed to be Dr. Sam Beckett bouncing around in time and finding himself
I
as a New
mean,
Orleans detective and having to
it,
fake an accent?
if you really think about it, if you take Quantum Leap and kind of extend it into like where it would essentially go, he
I think
could
that's my
be.
new headcanon is anytime I see Scott Bakula, that's actually Sam Beckett
There you
trying to
go.
solve a mystery. Yeah.
You're just seeing him as Sam Beckett, whereas everyone else sees Detective So
The
and
other
So
characters in
as
the movie see something else. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. um, I think actually one of the things that I enjoy about what Bakula brings as well, because you were talking about like him as a researcher, as an archival researcher, he is curious. He's he's in the moment. He's not trying to necessarily put any expectations on anything, but he also has a lot of empathy. Like he
Right.
you don't see this sometimes with a lot of scientific characters. Like there's always that like cold scientist who's very like, I have to take a step back and be distant from the thing,
Yeah. Good
which a
point.
lot of people also put on archivists as somehow we are devoid of emotions when it comes to records.
Only on
Uh,
TV, I think.
yeah, but Sam Beckett is filled with empathy. Like he wouldn't be able to accomplish what he accomplishes if he didn't feel empathy or sympathy for who he is, who the person he's embodying at that moment, which I feel like sometimes is often overlooked,
No,
in terms of
that's totally true. And back to our metaphor, it's something that's totally important in primary source research too,
Mhm,
is to like develop some historical empathy, like try to understand um, the terms under which the record was created that you're looking at, right? Like
mhm,
really to really get into someone's personal papers and really start to understand how things were created and what they represent, like that is leaping into someone's life
mhm.
in the past, right? And so, no, I think you're spot on there. There's a really good analogy for the kind of historical empathy that you need to practice when you're doing
Yeah.
historical primary source research.
And I think Loki also touches on this too, because it's entirely about making this very selfish character feel empathy and sympathy for, they are variants of him, but they are still distinctly different from him.
Right.
Like feeling that empathy and sympathy, but also feeling that greater empathy and sympathy for like the world and the timelines, and what is the significance of saving one timeline or like letting them all go over another or something like that. And it's like these shows are very much rooted in the fact that you have to have some level of human understanding in order
Right.
to accomplish your goal.
Cultural competency, we call that in the
Yeah,
field now, don't we? Right. There's
yeah.
a, I hadn't thought about that, but there's like an appraisal and selection metaphor in there too, with the
Hmm.
pruning the timelines and what have you.
Yeah,
And yeah,
it's usually like cold and calculated. And then when we first meet the time variance authority, it's very like, first of all, bureaucratic nightmare, which gives it a very like soulless, like matter of fact pragmatism to it.
mhm.
As you watch like Loki be basically treated, what is that, dehumanized, kind of like that prisoner mentality where it's like, you are a number, you are a variant, you are
Right.
not.
First episode, they take his clothes away and put him in
Yeah.
a jumpsuit or something. And
Yeah,
yeah,
they
you just have to
literally
take a number
strip
and wait in
him.
line. It's a
Yeah,
very un-Loki situation, right?
exactly. Like they're literally stripping him of his identity
Right.
in the first 10 minutes of the show.
Was
Um and then like, yeah, putting him into like a nondescript jumpsuit, and then basically forcing him into a role that he was not on a trajectory to complete. And then he like is kind of taking on aspects of a Loki we know from previous movies, but is also kind of distinctly making himself a different version of that Loki at the same time. All because they forced him to
right.
they dehumanized him and then kind of enforced a certain amount of empathy and sympathy on him in the
Right.
course of that. Like it was a byproduct of this dehumanized treatment.
Hopefully, dehumanizing bureaucracy is not too strong a metaphor for any archives workers out there.
Yeah. Well,
Not
sometimes
my
they'll,
bureaucracy. Also not a
yeah,
sponsor, but
the
yeah.
exact, not sponsored by bureaucracy, but
Right.
intrigued by its use as a trope in most
Sure.
television. I
Sure.
mean, yeah, bureaucracy is always kind of an interesting thing, because if you also look at like the makeup of the TVA in terms of like the setup there, there's always like some brutalist architecture somewhere
Mhm.
in these kinds of things, because again, brutalist architecture, bureaucracy, soulless, that kind of thing, which it always wraps itself around to that for some reason.
Yeah. It goes back to what we were saying about the imposing facade implying power,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, even in the TVA, when people are brought to trial, the little kangaroo court of like how the judges are so much higher up. Even like in a regular courtroom, the judge is not always so high, removed from the situation. But in the TVA, it almost seems like the judge is kind of like even higher up so that they can look down.
It's very
um
dramatic on TV. Like it is
oh
that in
yeah,
real life, but on TV, they're always like 20
yeah,
feet up. They're
they're like, hello,
like 10 times
I'm
higher than the pharmacist. You know what I mean?
exactly. But I always think it is like, it's that, again, like we've been talking about, like that visual shorthand.
Right.
Especially if you watch enough television and movies, you kind of get an idea for, okay, camera angle up, camera angle down, like that's the language of authority versus right and wrong, like that kind of stuff, which I mean I pay attention to because I watch a lot of TV and movies.
Oh, but we
um
all understand it, even if we don't study it, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
it becomes kind of inherent, like your brain is kind of trained over the course of your life watching this kind of stuff to go like, oh, they're the authority, they're in the wrong, and then they buck the system, and then it's like, oh, okay, metaphor. Everything's a metaphor. I don't know if you know this, Rory, but
It's partly my fault today, too.
well, you got to bring it in. One of the things I also wanted to talk about with Quantum Leap is, I don't know this offhand, but maybe you do because you've been watching a bit more than I have. Did Sam Beckett ever leap into someone who was inherently in the wrong, like a bad
Probably.
person?
Probably. I can't think of one off the top of my head.
Okay.
Um, Absolutely, though, he did leap into people that were very on Sam Beckett. Like we were just talking
Hmm.
about all these qualities of Sam that make him a good person, just like the
Hmm.
empathy and the kindness and the curiosity and the intelligence.
Yeah.
There were definitely episodes where he leaped into someone and people are like, "Why are you talking like that? Like, are you sure? Like,
It's
why
like,
didn't you just punch that guy for saying that?" Like those, there were those
yeah,
moments in the show. I can't think of any specifically, but
yeah,
they
but it
were
was
there.
definitely
Yeah.
there.
Mhm.
Yeah, because I mean, that's the thing about also a show like Quantum Leap and the time period in which it came out, is that I mean, the ethics and morality of putting your hero into the body of like the most like evil of people or something like that and trying to change the course of history that way that I don't know if that gets more into Twilight Zone area, but it's also a staple of science fiction.
No, actually, you reminded me of the one they didn't have. They didn't. They didn't feature Sam Beckett leaping into famous people very often, but there was
Yeah.
that two-parter where he became Lee Harvey Oswald,
Oh,
and that's probably
okay.
the closest to the thing that you're getting at right now.
Hmm.
Um, where
But then that's also like,
he leaped into Oswald twice. He leaped into young Oswald, and then he leaped into Oswald on the day of the JFK assassination. And
okay. That I think I was kind of like, in terms of like research, I saw those clips
yeah,
of the JFK assassination being like, oh, of course they did, because it's only been 20 years since it happened when you think about when the show aired.
I,
Um,
I I know a little bit about that actually. There were two things that influenced the that particular plot. Is that one, the JFK movie had just come out. Remember that one from the early
oh,
'90s with
uh-huh.
Kevin Costner and like We're Through the Looking Glass.
Was that the Oliver
Um,
Stone movie?
yeah, the Oliver Stone one.
Okay.
And two, Belisario knew Oswald. They had been in the Marines together in the '50s,
Oh.
right? Yeah, take a minute with that.
Oh.
And so Belisario thought that the JFK, the Oliver Stone got some things wrong about Oswald, and because Belisario knew Oswald, and so like,
It's also Oliver Stone, so I mean,
yeah, it's a different podcast. Um, but anyway, that episode
mhm.
is sort of Belisario's revenge on the JFK movie.
Gotcha.
Um, but it does feature Sam trying to do exactly what Sam, the character, is saying what you, Sam, the archivist, are just talking about.
Mhm.
Um, Trying to do something really radically change what this, I don't know if you call Oswald evil, depends
Mhm.
on what conspiracy you believe, but
Yeah.
this person who did something majorly wrong, try to do something about it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of one of the things I'm curious about with the newer one. I mean, you figure everyone always has like their 9/11 moment, because we are upon the anniversary of 9/11 as we
Sure.
record this. So it's like you have a very like, you're 20 years removed from a big event that happened in American history, in world history, quite frankly. And like in the similar way that Quantum Leap could accomplish something like that, where it's like it's only been 20 some odd years since Kennedy was assassinated.
Right. Right.
And so it's just like, how do you deal with like recent traumas? And even 20 years doesn't feel like it's recent, but it is recent because the world doesn't let you forget about it. Like our collective memory will just be like, remember, do you remember this? It's like, yes, thank you, sorry. um so I'm curious like how that the newer version will handle like kind of global tragedies, especially since there are so many now.
Right. Think about all the things that have gone down since the original show. You mentioned
Hmm.
9/11 and uh, the endless war of the early 21st century. And I
Yeah.
don't try to get political about it, but yeah.
No, I mean, you kind of have to though. The like
Right.
that's the thing, even with like the original Quantum Leap, it's inadvertently political, because I doubt that they were like, we're going to be a political time travel show.
Right.
But you have Sam Beckett like leaping into women, into the bodies of women,
Mm-hmm.
portraying white women. He was, I think, a black woman at one point. I think like a background singer for like Motown or something, if I
Oh, I don't
recall.
remember that one.
I feel like it
But
was because,
certainly, yeah, he leapt into characters of all
yeah,
and race in the United States, anyway. Yeah.
yeah, which poses its own issues, when you really think about the implications of a white man leaping into a black woman's body.
I have to
um
go back and watch some. I felt like they were very even-handed about that at the time,
mhm.
but it'd be interesting to see how it aged.
Yeah, I think that's always the thing when you go back to shows like this that are clearly rooted in an 80s 90s mentality, and
Yeah.
then taking you back to the bygone era, the old days of when I guess Donald P. Belisario would have been a child.
Well,
So
it's
the
very, looking at it now, it's very informed by like an American boomer's perspective on the
mm-hmm,
world. Like the premise is that Sam Beckett leaps around in his lifetime, which in the show is 1953 to 1990 something, right?
mm-hmm,
Um, but he rarely comes past the 70s, right? It's very much the whole show is nostalgia
Yeah.
for boomers and mostly, for white boomers in America.
Oh my God. Doesn't he go to the Civil War at one point?
There is a Civil War one, and I've never seen that one. I don't know how they explain it. There is a World War II one,
Yeah,
uh,
there's
which is
Vietnam.
another one of my favorite science fiction tropes is that lightning will do anything. Lightning hits the time machine, and in that episode, Al becomes the time traveler and Sam becomes the hologram.
Oh, they did a switch
They switch them, and so in that way, they get to go back to World War II because they get to bounce around in
in
Al's
in
lifetime
Al's lifetime. Yeah, yeah.
rather than just Sam's. I don't remember how they hacked the premise to get to Civil War. I'll watch it. We'll have to do a sequel.
Yeah. We'll do like a real mini episode where it's like, okay, we watched the Civil War episode. What do they do with it? Because
Right.
I think in the clip I saw, he's wearing a Union uniform. So, whew, right. Solved that one there. I mean, could you imagine if they tried to put him into a Southern general's, like if he was playing General Lee? I mean,
yeah. Getting back to the whole thing we're saying about politics, that the original show managed to avoid some of that by having it be very personal stories. Right? It's all people you've never heard of, and I guess it's thinking globally and acting locally, right? Like
yeah.
Sam Beckett doesn't get very many chances to affect sweeping change on America or the world. It just wasn't. They didn't write it into the show that way, and in some way, it makes for a better drama because it's about people and not about
for sure
geopolitical anything.
Whether they think about it or not, which
except for Oswald, I guess.
Yeah, I mean that's the things. Like I don't remember who said it, but I remember having a professor who was just like everything is political. And like the writing of a TV show is political, and even if you are not intending to, like Belisario's like more recent ventures. I mean, I have my issues with NCIS for
well, don't tell my mom.
Yeah. Well, my mom watches it too. And I'll come out and she's like watching an old episode and I'm just like, this is so paternalistic. I cannot even deal with the fact that everyone has a terrible relationship with their father. Because they all have to look to Gibbs to be like their daddy.
Right. TV dad. Yeah.
Yeah. But at the same time, you look at that and then you kind of go back and look at an early Belisario show and you're like, you can kind of see this stuff's kind of like rearing its ugly head with the marine aspects and the Navy and all that kind of stuff. But the show for what it is also very entertaining. And that you can kind of experience these historical events and like from different perspectives, but also like having Sam kind of be that I guess moral guidepost for lack of a better way of looking at it.
No, I still, even reviewing it critically lately, I still absolutely love the show. I should have explained that at the top. I came here to praise Quantum Leap, not to bury it. But getting back to what you're saying about the moral guidepost, I think there's another analogy in the time travel shows is that it is sort of the hero is archivist and the archivist is hero, maybe the analogy that many of us try to make.
That would be nice.
In our own day-to-day lives, right? Like you're talking about morals, we're talking about politics enacted locally, like those are like social justice themes, right? And even these bureaucracies that are behind these time travelers, like that's what they think they're doing. They think they're doing justice, right? By going back, enabling the true destiny of all these characters. And check my notes to see where I was going with that.
You definitely see it with like Mobius in Loki, or
But you see a lot of that. Sorry, archives. Let's come back to archives with that. Well, these are all buzzwords in the field right now, right? These are all trending. I shouldn't say buzzwords. That sounds negative. There's a trending topics in the field,
right?
Social justice, and there was a good panel on archival debt at SAA this year. And I don't know if you checked out any of it streaming, but this idea that like you get into a job and there's sort of the short way to put it, the short colloquial way to put it is that like you get into a job and there's a mess to clean up, and like you didn't create this, but like
Mm-hmm.
you're in the institution now and it's your job to clean it up.
I
That
understand
could be a
that.
backlog, that could be archival gaps in the collections, that could be DEI work that needs to be done. And
Mm-hmm.
that's there's sort of there's something to these time travel shows about that too. There's like some historical debt that they're like trying to pay off by helping characters reach their true destiny, quote
Right.
unquote.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I hadn't really thought of it that way. That's really cool, actually. And I know about archival debt, like my new position. I have inherited quite a lot.
This is what I said. As soon as I was like, oh, that's what that's called. Like I knew about that
Yeah.
my whole career. I just didn't know there was a term for it.
Yeah, like archival institutions are just, I mean, again, these are things that a lot of people don't know unless they're in the community.
Right.
Is that, institutions financially will only give you so much, labor wise will only give you so much. I mean, there's a lot of people that are operating on a shorthand or shorthanded with only themselves, really. Like we talk about
Right.
lone arrangers,
Mm-hmm.
but
Mm-hmm.
in a lot of institutions, there's just one person running an entire department and being tasked with a lot of things they were not prepared to be in charge of, quite frankly. Like,
I watch Quantum Leap now, and to Loki to some degree because they're always jumping around. They're always in a new situation, right?
mm-hmm.
And the kind of context switching like that hits home for
Yeah.
me. Like I have, uh, I think I literally have like 14 areas of responsibility spelled out in my annual evaluation documentation. You know, jumping from donor relations to engaging with expert researchers to
Mm-hmm.
class visits, doing and directing processing work. Like you're always jumping from one thing to another. And then sometimes you walk into the office and it's a surprise,
Yeah.
you're like, oh, there's a box there. And you're like, oh boy, you just like
Oh
Sam Beckett.
no.
Oh boy. Oh,
Oh
so and so
boy.
donor is here and they're upset about something. Oh boy. and
Mm.
then cut to the theme song.
Yeah, you should
Uh,
just have like a picture of Sam Beckett saying,
I
"Oh
should just
boy."
have Quantum Leap theme song ready to play. I could be
Is
like,
that
oh boy. Do,
instead of the
do, do, do,
archivist
do.
is in, it just says, "Oh boy."
So not only like switching around within a position, but there's also an analogy there for people that are in a series of term positions, right? You can look at Sam Beckett and other time travelers that way, or just really anybody in an episodic narrative like you find in a TV show or a comic book or whatever, where like they're wandering from town, the fugitive or whatever, they're wandering
Yeah,
from
yeah,
town to
yeah.
town and there's a new situation. Like that's what you're doing when you work a series of like 1 year term positions or fellowships or whatever. Like you're showing up
Mhm.
in a new place, you're leaping from job to job, striving to put right what once went wrong, right?
I mean,
And hoping
yeah.
each job is the leap home, right? You're hoping something's going to lead to a permanent position so you can stop
Yeah, this idea
living
of
a
like
different episode every year or semester of your life.
oh my God, yeah, the journeyman archivist
Yeah.
life is just like when I started in graduate school, I almost saw that as romantic. Like there's like a romanticism to it because when you initially start as a baby archivist, you're kind of like in this sense of like, oh man, I love history, I love all this stuff. I'm gonna like traveling around because I'm in my 20s and fuck it, whatever. I can do
Right.
what I want. And like there's a romanticism to like going to these different positions and gaining this experience and this blah blah blah. And then once you have 10 years of experience under your belt, you're like, what was I thinking?
Why would I own anything? Yeah.
Yeah.
And
I have no home, no permanent residence.
and it's well, the thing you think you're going to do, right, when you're young and idealistic is you're thinking of something more like consultancy, right? Like where you're
Yeah.
in charge and like you're picking where
Mm-hmm.
you go. And it's like, that's not Quantum Leap. Quantum Leap is like, you leave this position, you don't know when you're leaving, you don't know what the next one's going to be.
Exactly.
It's a
You have these
very,
parameters that you have to like work within. You only have so much power you can utilize or consolidate. Like
yeah,
you are at the behest of something bigger than
yeah,
yourself. Like
which we all are to some degree. But it really made me think. Thank God, I've never had to do this, but like, the way people who jump from like one grant funded position to another. That is very it's very
Ugh.
quantum leapy. It's a little too dramatic, but it
Yeah.
made me think of that. The
If
show
you were
made
the type of archivist who does that, I salute you. And my God,
yeah.
please come on the show. We can talk about it. It's a therapy session.
Yes. I hope their next leap is the leap home.
It's like, unless you're Sam Beckett and never get back home.
That's actually what I want out of this new show is one episode that like wraps up
That would be nice. I mean,
Sam Beckett's story. It's just like
for
just
those
tell
out there
us
who,
that he got back to Donna at some point,
yeah,
please. Or
for
that he's
those
in
who,
charge, that he's a consultant instead of
yeah,
at the mercy of
of the
understreet
computer.
capitalism of the archival market.
Like for those who don't know, I mean, again, we're doing spoilers. This should be like, you should know that we were going to spoil a lot of things,
Like,
but
spoilers for a 30-year-old show. Sorry.
yeah, spoilers for a 30-year-old show. So what Quantum Leap is also like notoriously known for in terms of like episodic television is that the last episode of the 5th season ended up being the series finale on top of everything else, which Belisario was not entirely sure about. He was told to write a season finale that could potentially be a series finale, but it wasn't assured. He was kind of under the impression they would give him a 6th season, and then they didn't. And so they had to tack on at the end of the episode of Quantum Leap that Sam Beckett never made it home. Like, it's the most tragic.
It's like, oh, by the way, it's just a title card that tells you, oh, by the way, Sam never makes it home. It's very Poochie like. It's like, and Sam Beckett died on the way home to his home planet. It might as well have said that, right?
Yeah. It's so like for those who were probably like really into Quantum Leap at the time, I mean, it had a nice following, like in terms of like, I don't know if I'd call it a cult following, but it had a good audience.
It was a cult following. It was actually a little trivia for you. The 4th season only happened after a letter writing campaign, back when people actually had to put pen to paper and write letters.
There we go.
People. It was on the chopping block after the 3rd season, and then the fan response back. So yeah, a little bit of a cult favorite even at the time.
Yeah. So yeah, fandom was very much involved in keeping the show alive for as long as it was. And then so if you were a fan at the time and like you're watching that last episode and you see that title card and you're like, what is this?
I think I did watch it live.
Did you?
In 1993 or whatever. And my recollection is that by that time, like the advertising had let us know that it was the series finale.
Oh, did they?
But it is just kind of a drop. Like,
yeah,
he finishes the mission or whatever of that episode, and then it's very Poochie like. It's like, oh, and by the way, Sam never makes it home. It's like,
turns out he's not coming back, guys.
You had to make up an ending out of nothing, and you chose that one. Like, why did you do that to us?
Like, you could have
put anything on that title card.
Exactly. You didn't even need the title card. Like,
right.
The fact
it actually would have been better without an ending.
Yeah,
exactly.
It would have been a much more hopeful end to the series if you hadn't like given people this notion in their head now that Sam is forever stuck in this perpetual state of leaping and can never rest or never get home.
So, crossing our fingers, Scott Bakula wants to make a guest appearance.
I would hope
on the new one.
I feel like it would be a real missed opportunity because Bakula's still up and running. I mean, he's doing it CIS or CSI or whatever the hell. No, not NCIS. He's doing freaking like acronyms.
One of the acronym shows. Yeah,
one of the acronym shows. But he's still alive and kicking. Like, it's unfortunate that Dean Stockwell has passed away because that would have been amazing to have like Al and Sam back in some way, shape, or form. But
good stunt casting.
Yeah. I don't know. Like, if you could get Sam in there and just kind of like go like, hey guys, guess what? Sam made it back. It turns out that title card is bullshit.
Like, what if the first episode of the next one just as a title card is like, by the way, Sam Beckett got home. He and Donna have kids, and now this is the next stage of Project Quantum Leap. That would be great.
That would be a really nice thing to do. I don't know if they'll actually do it.
No.
But it feels like with a show like this that is basically capitalizing on the nostalgia of the original Quantum Leap, if you didn't have Scott Bakula at some point, would be a huge waste of what you're cashing in on to begin with.
Yeah.
Like, But what do I know? I'm just an archivist.
We know some things.
I know. I know some stuff about some
Know some
things.
stuff. We just talked for an hour about some stuff.
Yeah, I've made several episodes of this video series in which I have talked about things I may or may not know about. But yeah, trying to think. Is there anything that we haven't covered, Rory, that you've been itching to talk about with Quantum Leap or with Loki?
I think we touched on a lot of the things I wanted to say about time travel. I feel like we didn't talk about Loki very much. Did you hit
Yeah,
everything you wanted to say about Loki or
I feel like
Marvel
because
multiverse or whatever?
Marvel. Oh god, the multiverse. Yeah, it's because Loki exists in this weird place where, like, as a standalone, like from an archival point of view, it was fascinating to me just because when I started watching it, I was like, oh, okay, bureaucracy is going to play
Hmm.
some factor into this, so I'll probably get like I knew I was going to write an article about it at some point because it's like they're going to include some kind of archival research or whatever. I wasn't expecting at the very last minute of the last episode of the first season for them to be like, oh no, we're in the archives, because they never say it. Like that's what's wild to me about Loki is that you go what 8 to 10 episodes, this one setting is kind of like your primary,
Hmm.
aside from the like jumping around to the different planets and times and variants and whatnot. Although the one episode we're in the where they're in the place where they send the pruned variants, like in that space, where you get
Hmm.
to see a like alligator Loki and
Right, right.
young Loki and everything. I love that episode. But yeah, it's Richard E. Grant. I mean, how can you not love old Loki? Like old man Loki.
It was good too.
Yeah.
Good too.
If they did an old man Loki series, I would watch that because you just get to watch more Richard E. Grant running
We're
around.
getting a season 2, right?
Yeah, they're getting to season 2, but he
Right.
technically died. Spoilers.
It's multiverse. No one's ever
I
dead.
that's true. But yeah,
Yeah.
it's this whole multiverse thing, which, at the end of the season when they kind of like open it up now, where it's like, okay, all timelines are relevant and necessary and out there. Then it's like, so what's the point of the TVA now? Like, what is the TVA going to do? Like when your entire purpose has been essentially removed. Like, are they going to like try to reassert authority and reassert
Right.
some kind of sacred timeline that no longer exists? Like, I find that fascinating, but also dangerous, like, from an archival point of view.
What was the TVA the same in the comics? Was that their thing? Was like revising things and being like
I
very on the nose about retcons and
I don't
things?
remember. Like the ins and outs of the Marvel comics are less something that I have any kind of like knowledge of. Like
Sure.
I feel like with the Marvel universe, I'm much more because like the DC universe, I could tell you a lot of things about what happens
Hmm.
in the DC comics in the universe because that was kind of much more my jam.
Yeah.
Whereas the Marvel cinematic universe has been more of my introduction. So I have less invested in it where I'm like,
Okay.
whatever they do, I'm just what story are they telling in this movie versus like, oh, they adapted this comic and
Yeah.
blah blah blah. I'm much more precious about like whatever Batman stories they adapt for whatever purposes.
I'm the second kind of Marvel movie fan. I'm like, eh, my partner can't watch with me anymore because I'm always like, that's the shot, that's the cover of Amazing Spider-Man 252. They did it exactly.
Mm-hmm.
I'm that guy in the movie theater. But you're a DC fan, and all the thing you were saying about like the multiverse and how everything counts now, it reminds me of how someone tried to explain hypertime to me. I don't think I ever really understood hypertime, but that was it, right? That like suddenly every DC comic was canon, right?
Yeah,
Wasn't that the
yeah, yeah.
idea behind hypertime?
They they go through the I mean, I think both Marvel and DC go through this thing where they create so many different books that then contradict each other in terms of whatever
Right.
continuity or timeline. Because definitely with DC, the New 52 was a way of trying to reboot their timeline.
Yeah.
Marvel did that, I think, when they had like the Ultimates, because they had the Ultimate Universe and then they had like the regular 616 universe, but then they like merged them, which is how we got
Eventually, yeah.
how we
Yeah.
got Miles Morales and that kind of stuff. But DC's always been kind of like, they rebooted more times, I think, that Marvel ever has. Marvel was much more like, yeah, all timelines, whatever, you know,
Hmm.
you can
Hmm.
do whatever you want. And then DC was like, no, 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 we must condense, and it's too big now, and no one knows what's happening. It's like, yeah, but whenever you try to fix it, you make it worse. Like,
Right. When these editorial decisions become part of the plot. And I think
yeah.
that was kind of the role of the TVA in the comic book stories of the 80s and 90s, was to sort of like wink, wink, nudge, nudge.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe this one comic book story where uh, the Human Torch doesn't act like himself is like, maybe, oh, that never happened, or that's an alternate
Yeah.
universe. They're actually,
This writer didn't understand the Human Torch well enough, so we're just going to say that it's a variant.
yeah, like a wink, nudge at those sort of editorial or retroactive
Mm-hmm.
narratives.
Well, and Marvel's always been much better, I think, about acknowledging those things too. Uh, and I don't know if that's just from the previous influence of someone like Stan Lee, who had like a sense of humor about a lot of these things, where it was much more the blue collar, kind of the down to earth, more grounded mentality of working class superheroes to a certain extent. I mean, you have your Tony Starks and you have your, you know, your Reed Richards and whatnot, but like your Spider-Mans and you
Mm-hmm.
know, a lot of his ilk are very much like, we we can barely afford to be superheroes, quite frankly.
Right.
But then you have things like the TVA, or you had like, I think there was like a cleanup crew in Marvel Comics, where it was like the people who cleaned up after the hero battles, like
Yeah, damage control. That's what
damage control. There
they're
we go.
using in the TV shows now. That the damage control unit is
Yeah.
based on some really hilarious comics from the 80s and
Yeah.
90s, actually. Yeah.
Like I
It
don't
was
think
very tongue in
DC,
cheek. And I think
yeah.
that gets to what you're getting at, is the Marvel Universe has always been very tongue in cheek about it
Yeah.
itself. Yeah.
Very kind of much more forgiving of when things don't necessarily jive with each other, where they can just be like, oh yeah, whatever. I mean, um,
It's that no prize mentality. It's like, find a creative way to explain it away rather than just say it didn't happen. Right. Make
exactly.
it work. Make it work. Yeah.
Yeah, very Tim Gunn, Project Runway, make it work kind of thing.
Uh-huh.
Whereas, yeah, DC, I mean, as much as I love it, DC does get a little bit more like tight wadded about when you point out, hey, this continuity doesn't quite match up, and they're like, yeah, it does. Um,
Why not?
like,
Yeah.
but how? Like,
Try
shut up.
harder.
Um, like that's how. And then Marvel also has, I always kind of, I appreciate yet loathe the Watchers, like this idea of your, because they've already kind of addressed it with like the What If cartoon
Yeah.
stuff, where they had,
Okay.
but also utilizing the Watcher in a way that I think was really smart, like going like, okay, Uatu's, I don't know if he's ever like actually called Uatu, but I'm calling him Uatu.
Sure.
um Uatu the Watcher is doing his thing, he's watching.
Mhm.
um but then like getting into that whole idea of like being the Watcher and the limitations of being the Watcher, despite being an basically omnipotent, omnipresent being who is like, but I can't help them, but I want to, but I can't, but I want to.
Right.
Which also kind of, to me, went very into the archival realm, because again, people think that we are neutral observers and that we can somehow separate ourselves from the records that we're going through, where we're like, I want to but I can't, but I want to but I can't. But then you
But
ultimately end up stepping in anyway, because that's what you do.
no, it's tough to be all powerful but like restrained watcher. Like by the time you get through um processing somebody's personal papers or something, like you do know them, right? Like
Mhm.
you're not neutral, you're not
No.
um
And I even have it
Trying to
here.
think of a word like ignorant, but it's not ignorant. Like you're not unaware of who they
Mhm.
were. You have that historical empathy that we've been talking about.
Yeah.
You don't need time travel. You just need to go to the archives. Like maybe that's how we should wrap that up.
It's its own time travel. Journey into a world of the past. Travel back in time.
And that gets back to what we were talking about. Sort of the hero is archivist and the archivist is hero. It's like
Mhm.
there is no one's neutral. Everyone has an opportunity to do the right thing at the right time.
Oh yeah. I mean, I have it written here. I mean, you can't really read it because it's
I can
backwards.
read that.
There you go.
Yeah.
Archives are not neutral. Like
Yeah.
that's I feel like that's just been my philosophy since graduate school. But I also had Rand Jimerson teaching me that
You were
neutrality
you were ahead
neutrality
of
is a
some of the
lie.
other classes. Yeah.
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 It's like, I mean, because that's the thing. It's like anything where it has to assert control over a historical record is obviously not neutral. Even if you say like, uh, we don't touch the records because we want to maintain the purity of the record or whatever. It's like that's an action. That's not neutrality. That's being very active.
If you choose not to decide, you still have made a choice. That's right. Rush said that.
Yeah.
Um, I was going to say something else. I'm fond of saying that all archivy is activism,
Mm-hmm.
right? You're always making choices about what to keep, what not to. You never have as much resources as you want, so
Yeah.
you're naturally prioritizing something. That is just the job.
Yeah.
And so anytime you prioritize something, you're advocating for it in a way. Like
Mm-hmm.
all archivy is activism. And so I've gone back and forth with some people on what you're getting at, the issue of neutrality. I was like, you're not neutral. Everything you do is advocacy for something.
As a human being, you are not neutral. Like you are never like
And right,
you can be meh about a thing, but you're still kind of taking a stance on it by saying like I choose not to care about it. Which is in its own way saying like I'm washing my hands of it and whatever happens here I'm not responsible for. But like if you really get into it.
right. And getting back to like, yeah, our time traveling heroes and the idea of acting locally and making a difference. Like,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, everyone has that, whether they're an archivist or not.
Yeah.
Um,
All of
presumably,
you are archivists. You just don't know it.
presumably, yeah. Well, it's a whole other podcast.
Yeah.
Everyone does manage the life cycle of some information. Yeah, that's a
Yeah,
whole
we're
other
just going to get into
podcast.
the real nitty gritty of
Yeah,
philosophy as it pertains to archiving in this episode.
I'll go get 2 whiskeys, come back, and we can do
Okay.
that.
All right. I'm going to pull my Derrida out. I feel like I always have to.
Someone needs to explain him to me, so this is perfect.
Okay. Well, my understanding of him, I think, has lessened over the years. Let's get Vern Harris on the phone, and then we'll have him explain it to us in a
There we
way
go.
that
There we go.
makes sense and is in a beautiful South African accent
Yeah.
versus us talking about it with our,
Right.
generic American accents.
Spice it up a little bit.
Yeah, there we go. I wonder if he actually has a pop culture thing that he would want to talk about. Should reach out. I don't know. Be like, hi, Vern Harris. I would like you to come on my show and talk about a movie.
Is that how it works? Is that how you get people?
That's essentially what I've been doing. It's not like everyone's clamoring to be on here. I'm just kind of like, hey, you want to do this? And people are like, yeah or no. So I've been very lucky that I know a lot of people who want to do it. So
That's true. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, there's always something to talk about. Like we did. We've been doing this for an hour and a half already.
Have we?
About yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But no, I mean, yeah, it's what I love about doing this is that, again, like you and I going back and forth about what to talk about leads to Quantum Leap and Loki as kind of like the similar vein. And then we talk about it for an hour and a half ish. And you would get this little gem of an episode. So, something you can show to your kid one day.
He'll hate it. Doesn't like anything with me in it. He'd rather watch anything. I've done it before. Tried to pull up video of me, the archive.
There you
There
are.
we go.
Okay.
There we go.
I lost you. was like,
You can just like, if it freezes, you can just like put in the blue halo effect, and it's just me leaping out of the podcast.
Oh no, I'll put in I'll put in a title card.
Yeah, probably never made it back to the Zoom session. That is how this should end.
I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna do it. That's where I feel like that's a good place to stop.